If you've had a chance to play the features demo game included with NERPG Core or the Lost Soul demo game included with NERPG Engine, you may have noticed that there are certain gathering skills included, such as mining, herbalism, logging, and fishing. So how do you use these trade skills in your own game, and what happens if you want to set up different prefabs for the items that will be collected? That's what we'll be covering in this episode. So let's get started. For this tutorial, I will be using NERPG Engine 0.15, which is a free download available from nerpg.org/downloads in Unity package format. All of the functionality that I will be demoing is available in the free NERPG Core package, which is available from the Unity Asset Store. However, some of the prefabs that I'm using are only available in the full NERPG engine. I will also be using the free third-party asset Glowing Forest by Silvercats, which is available from the Unity Asset Store as well. To create the demo game, you can go to Tools, NERPG, Wizard, and New Game Wizard. For the game name, I'll be entering Gathering. For the first scene name, I'll just be entering Forest. I'll click on Copy Existing Scene, open the Scythian Cat folder, look for the Demo folder, and pull in Demo Scene 01, and click Create. Once the New Game Wizard is complete, there is some template content that I'm going to install. For that, I will go to Tools, NERPG, Wizard, Template Content Wizard, and there are 10 pieces of template content that I need to install. First is the All Gathering Skills template package. This has the gathering skills mining, logging, fishing, herbalism, and skinning. Next, I'm going to install the items for each of those, so all gathering mining items, all gathering logging items, all gathering herbalism items, and all gathering fishing items. This will install the prefabs for the built-in items that we can pull into our level and allow us to harvest. Next, I need to install the Leatherworking Supplies vendor collection, and that will install the animal hide that I'm going to use for skinning. I'm also going to install the fighter character class because I will need to actually kill something, so that's best done with a character class. I'm going to install the rabbit unit template package, and this is only available in the NERPG engine because we want to skin the rabbit when it's killed. I'm going to install the enemy faction template package so that we can make the rabbit hostile. And finally, I'm going to install the impact sound effects template package. This is because there is a minor bug in 0.15 where the proper sound effect for mining isn't installed. So by installing impact sound effects template package, we'll just make sure that that sound effect is properly installed. Then I will click Install and wait for the template content to finish installing. Once the template content is installed, there is some minor setup that we need to do on the scene. First, we're going to delete the Group Cameras folder because we don't need any cameras. NERPG already has its own cameras. Next, we need to bake a nav mesh. To do that, we can go to Window, AI, Navigation, and we need to set the bridges to static. So in the Inspector tab, just set the bridge to static and choose No, this object only. And same for the other bridge, static, no, this object only. Next, we can actually bake the nav mesh by going to the Bake tab and clicking on Bake. Now there is one thing that you'll notice once the navigation mesh is baked, and that's that there are these areas on the path here where there is no nav mesh, and this is for some reason Unity decides that you can't walk under branches because of the agent height. You can play around with the agent height here and rebake a little bit and probably get something that's a little better. If anybody has a solution to this to stop Unity from setting the branches themselves from interfering with the navigation mesh, I would absolutely love it if you would leave a note in the comments. We should also set a default spawn location for the character. So what I'm going to do is just middle click on the ground right here with my mouse, then find the default spawn location in the scene and click Ctrl-Alt-F to set the default spawn location. Now let's take a quick look at how gathering skills work in AnyRPG. When we installed the gathering skill template content, it installed a bunch of stuff in our resources folder, as well as some prefabs. Let's take a look at the resources first. Under resources gathering, under skill, we can find gathering skills. If we look at them, for example, the fishing skill, a skill is basically just a collection of abilities that you can learn. So the fishing skill teaches you the fishing ability, the herbalism skill teaches you the herbalism ability, the logging skill teaches you the logging ability, mining teaches you mining, and skinning is a little bit special. It doesn't actually teach you any specific abilities, but we'll get to what's special about skinning a little later in this tutorial. Let's take a look at a few of those abilities. I can go to base ability, and under professions gathering, you'll see, for example, the herbalism ability. If I open that, then basically what the herbalism ability is doing is just using an animation profile of herbalism to make it look like your character is bending over and picking up an herb. And this is a special type of ability called a gather ability. Let's look at another one that actually uses a prefab. So we have the logging ability, which has the logging animation. The logging animation hit audio profile of chop, so every time that the axe hits the tree, we'll hear a chopping sound. And finally, there is a holdable object in here, and that's the logging axe. So we'll be holding the logging axe in our right hand while we are performing this ability. Skills must be learned from skill trainers, so we'll need to put a skill trainer in our scene. We can go to the prefab folder under Unit Spawn Node, Interactable, and Skill Trainer, and I'll just drag in the Herbalism Skill Trainer Unit Spawn Node. By default, each of these template trainers that were installed are only going to teach one skill. So let's go edit the Herbalism Skill Trainer so he can teach us multiple skills. To do that, I'll go down to the Unit Profile and Skill Trainer folder, look for the Herbalism Skill Trainer unit, and then scroll down and find his inline interactable options. You can see he has one inline interactable option of Skill Trainer props, and he's only teaching Herbalism right now. I can choose 5 different skills here, well, as many as I want, but in this case there are only 5. So I'm going to choose fishing for the second skill, logging for the third skill, mining for the fourth skill, and skinning for the fifth skill. Now this skill trainer will teach us all of the skills. If all you want to do is use the built-in items that came with the template content for gathering, then it's as easy as just looking in the prefab folder of your game and looking under Spawnable Interactable Gathering and then choosing something. For example, this Herbalism Gray Flower node, and I can just pull that into the scene and my character would be able to go and harvest that as soon as he had the herbalism ability available to him. However, for this demo, let's take a look at how you would modify these. For example, maybe I want to harvest these mushrooms because these mushrooms are already in the scene and it makes a lot more sense to harvest them than a different flower that doesn't appear anywhere else in the scene. So let's go ahead and do that. First, I am going to choose a node to duplicate. So let's just take this Herbalism Gray Flower node. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. And I am going to name it the Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node. I will want to change the interactable name here to Spotted Mushroom. And you can see that the way this node works is it has an interactable, which is just a base interactable script that all interactables need. And then it has a gathering node interactable option associated with it, which will tell your character that he needs to cast the ability Herbalism in order to gather from this node. And it has a spawn timer. It will respawn after 30 seconds after you collect it. We'll have to make a loot table for this, as you can see that this is referring to the Herbalism Gray Flower loot table. And we'll have to choose a different spawn reference. So let's take a look at this mushroom over here. This mushroom is using the Mushrooms 02 prefab. So what I'll do is I will open up the Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node. You can see that we've got Flower Gray in there. I'm going to search my project for Mushrooms 02, which is right there. And I'm just going to pull that in underneath the node. Where we have the spawn reference, I'm just going to delete the Flower Gray here and then pull in that spawn reference, and now it will spawn and despawn these mushrooms when you collect them. Let's save the changes and then go ahead and alter the loot table for this. I'm going to scroll down to the loot table and go to gathering, and where we have the Herbalism Gray Flower node loot, I'm just going to hit Control D to duplicate that, and I will change this to Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node loot, and here we'll change that to Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node. And scrolling down, we will need to add one item, which is a spotted mushroom, because right now we just have a gray flower. So for that, I'm just going to go duplicate the gray flower. So we have the gray flower item under the items folder. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it and change that to the spotted mushroom item. If you want to create this from scratch, you can just go Create Any RPG, scroll down till you find Inventory and Item, and that would be pretty much the same thing. So under the spotted mushroom item, I'll also need to change the resource name up here. And I'm going to change the icon to a good mushroom icon. So I'll type in mushroom to find the mushroom spotted icon. And I'll just change the description as well. And that's all we have to do for the item. Let's go back to the loot table now and actually add the correct item to it. So under the Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node loot, we will add the spotted mushroom item. The way this loot table works is there are different groups, and this particular group has a 100% chance to drop, and that just means that there's a chance to drop. The chance is actually controlled by each individual item. In this case, the mushroom will have a 100% chance to drop, and we'll get between 2 and 4 mushrooms. Now that the loot table is set up and the item is set up, we should go back to the actual prefab. So I will go back to my spawnable interactable gathering Herbalism folder, go to the spotted mushroom node, and finally I will scroll down and change the loot table. So we'll type in Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node loot table, and now this item has the proper loot table associated with it. Next, I'll want to pull this into the scene. So I will drag the Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node into the scene. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on these mushrooms and right click on the transform and go copy component. Then I'm going to scroll down to the Herbalism Spotted Mushroom node and right click on the transform for that and just go paste component values. Now the spotted mushroom node should have ended up in the same place, but it didn't. And this is actually probably because this group mushrooms actually had its own offset. So let's actually pull the spotted mushroom node into the group mushrooms and actually paste the component values again, and now it appeared in the right spot. Now we can move that out of there, and I'm going to click on the mushrooms 0, 2. Actually, I'm just going to search for them through here then. Which one was it? There we go, it's these ones. Okay, so I'm going to delete these mushrooms 0, 2, and now the mushrooms that are in that spot are the ones we can actually collect. I'm also going to get rid of this gray flower node because we don't need that. Let's press play and see how that works. Once in the game, we can see our herbalism trainer, and we can see our spotted mushrooms over here. And if we wander over to them and try to click on them, nothing happens because we don't know herbalism yet. So I'll go over to the trainer and I will learn herbalism. And now I can go back to the mushrooms and click on them. And I cast the ability, and you can see that now I got 3 mushrooms. I can take them all and they appear in my inventory. Next, let's take a look at mining. Under the Gathering Prefab Spawnable Interactable Gathering Mining folder, you can see a bunch of mining nodes that were installed when we installed the template content. So I'm just going to grab the mining tin node and I'm going to pull it over here into the scene. Let's take a look at the mining tin node. It has a slightly different setup than the mushrooms did. So under the mining tin node, we can see that we have the tin node model, but we also have a rocks model. If we look at the mining tin node, we can see that it's only referencing the spawn reference as the actual tin node itself and not the rocks. Let's see how that will affect what happens when we try to collect it. First, I'm going to go to the herbalism trainer and learn the mining skill so that I can actually collect this. Then I'm going to walk over to the tin node and I am going to gather the tin. And you can see that only the crystal part of it disappeared and the rocks stayed behind because the rocks weren't linked as any part of that object that was in the spawn reference. So this is a way that you can basically leave something behind to indicate that a node should be or will eventually be there but just isn't spawned right now. Next, let's take a look at the logging skill. If we look in the level, we can see there are a number of trees here in the level, and let's say that I wanted to be able to collect one of these trees that fit the way that the rest of the trees in the level look. Under the Glowing Forest folder, under Prefabs and Plants, we can see that we have a bunch of trees, and in this case, this specific tree is called the fir tree. So let's make a logging node for the fir tree. If I go to the existing spawnable interactable logging, we have a bunch of different trees, and I'm just going to duplicate any one of them, like this spruce tree node. And now I can rename that to logging fir tree node. And I'm going to change the interactable name, which is basically what shows up under the tooltip, to fir tree. And then I have to do the same thing that I did with the mushrooms. I have to add a loot table and a different type of loot. So we will go and find under the resources folder where our loot tables are. And I'm going to look for the logging spruce tree node loot and Control D to duplicate it and call that logging fir tree node loot. And I'm going to set that to a fir log as what we'll be dropping, and then change that to a logging fir tree node for the loot table name. Then I'm going to go to the items, gathering logging. I'm going to duplicate the spruce log item, and I'm going to rename that to the fir log item. Change the name to fir log, and then change the name under the description to fir log. I'm just going to leave the icon as a log because, you know, a log is a log, and we don't have any special icon for the fir tree logs. Next, I can go back to the loot table and just make sure that everything is set there, and I already set the name to the fir log, so that's great. And then finally, I want to go back to the actual node under the prefab folder, and I will go to the loot table and just change that to the logging fir tree node. And I also need to open that up and make sure that rather than the spruce tree, which was what was in this by default, that I pull in the fir tree. So we'll go down to the Glowing Forest Prefabs Plants folder, and I'll grab the fir tree and just pull that in here. And then I will delete the existing spruce tree, and then under the spawn reference, I'll just set the spawn reference to fir. And that should work, so we will save that. And then I want to go into the scene and drag that in. So we'll go back up to our prefabs folder where the fir tree node was found, and I'm going to drag that to basically right where the existing tree is, and then I have to get rid of the existing one. Now the existing one is actually just a painted tree, so I'm going to click on the terrain and then click on the Paint Trees tab. This brush is huge, so let's shrink that way down, and then we can shift click to erase trees. So we'll hold down shift, click my mouse, and now the non-interactable tree is gone, and we have a tree that we should be able to collect there. Let's press play and see how that works. Now, with some of these other items, you may have noticed that they changed color when we moused over them. And that can make sense for certain items, like smaller things like the tin ore or the spotted mushroom. But when we mouse over this tree here, it looks a little bit ridiculous, and that's because this tree is using a cutout shader. So let's see how we would fix that. If we look at the logging fir tree node, there's a box here that says glow on mouse over. We can just uncheck that, and then the fir tree will not glow. We'll still get the tooltip, but it won't be all glowy and yellow. Now I can walk right up to the tree, I can mouse over it. You can see that I properly get the tooltip. I can click on it and collect it, but it's not doing that overly yellow glow and cutting out where all the branches should be with a solid object. You can see that the tree also completely disappeared. If I wanted to change that and have that act more like the mining node, then I can just open up the logging fir tree node. I'm going to go down to the Glowing Forest prefab folder, and there's a stump over here, so I'm just going to pull in that stump. I'm going to hit F to focus on it, and what I'm going to do, because that stump isn't like an exact match, is I'm just going to set the scale down a little bit and just make sure that the stump is skinnier than the actual tree so that it's not poking out when the tree is actually visible. And now we've got a little stump sort of inside the tree. That looks pretty good. And because that stump is not a child of the fir, then basically it'll be hiding inside the tree during normal play. But when I collect the tree, then we should see that there is a stump left over on the ground rather than nothing. So there we go. We can see now there's a stump on the ground where the tree used to be, kind of hiding under the bushes there. Next, let's take a look at fishing. So I'm going to pull a fishing prefab that was included with the template content into the level. We can see that there's a fishing node right here, so we'll just pull that in. I'm going to hit F to focus on it, and I think what I'll do is I will move this fish a little bit closer to the surface so he's near the top of the water. And now for all of the prefabs that we've been using so far to collect things, we've basically left the default settings alone. But in this case, it actually makes sense to make some modifications to them. So if we look under the fishing node, under interactable components, under interactable range, you can see this box collider here. This interactable range is the range where you'll actually get the prompt to gather this if you are using a gamepad. So if you are using a gamepad, it will probably make sense to make that box a lot bigger so that you can be standing on the shore and collecting it here. So I'll do that, and I'll also, because I'm just editing the scene object here, right click on that and apply as override in prefab fishing node. Don't choose interactable components because that'll do all of them, but this one will just apply to the fishing node. And then if you're also using the mouse and keyboard, and in fact this probably applies to the gamepad too, then what you want to do is look for the interaction max range here and set that also to a sane value so that your character doesn't actually have to jump in the water to harvest the fish, and then I'll apply that to the prefab fishing node. One other thing that we need to do with the fishing node is right now if I harvest this fish, it's actually not going to disappear, and that's because there's just a minor issue with the way that it's configured in the template content in 0.15. It'll be fixed in future versions, but for now what you want to do is click on check options to spawn. And you can just see from the tooltip what that's saying is that not only do all of these prerequisites have to be fulfilled, but in order for this thing to be spawned and in the level, then it's going to check all the other interactable options. And since gathering node is an interactable option, then it's going to check this, and because we will have already gathered it, then it'll properly despawn after we collect it. So let's go ahead and apply that to the prefab fishing node and then see how that works. After learning the fishing skill, I can wander over near the water. If I'm too far away and I right click on it, oh, not far away enough yet. There, now if I'm way too far away, then you can see fish is out of range, and if I get close enough, then I can right click on the fish and I will properly pull out my fishing rod and actually collect the fish. And now I have a bunch of fish in my inventory as well. Finally, let's take a look at skinning. Skinning is special because there is no actual animation or nodes that you will interact with for. You basically skin animals sort of by default when you kill them if the animal is configured properly. So let's go ahead and make a new loot table, and I'm just going to Control D to duplicate any existing new loot table. And in this case, I'm just going to call this rabbit loot because we will be killing the rabbit to get it. So I'll change the name up there to rabbit, and I'm going to change the item name here to animal hide because we're going to get an animal hide when we skin the rabbit, and everything else looks good. We have a 100% chance for this group to be able to drop items, and then a 100% chance to actually get the item animal hide dropped. We'll get between 1 to 3 of them. Now for skinning, you have to do one extra thing. You have to add a prerequisite condition to this, and then you'll want to go down to trade skill prerequisites. And unfortunately, the resource selector isn't available in this. It will be available in future versions of any RPG, but in 0.15 it wasn't. So you can just manually type in skinning in there. And what this means is that this particular item will only drop if you have the skinning skill available or learned. Next, let's actually go down to the unit profile for the rabbit and make sure that we associate this loot table with it. So I'm going to go down to unit profile character rabbit unit and then scroll down until I find the inline interactable options. In order to make a character lootable, you have to give it lootable character props. And finally, I will give it one loot table. And in this case, I'm going to give it the rabbit loot table, and that will allow this rabbit to potentially drop the animal hide, assuming that we actually have the skinning ability. One other thing that I need to do to the rabbit is I'm just going to set its aggro radius down to 10 because I'm going to put it on the other side of the bridge and I don't want it to aggro instantly when my character spawns. I also need to set the faction name to enemy, otherwise the rabbit will not be aggressive. And then I'll go over to navigation here, find a good spot that's on the nav mesh, and go up to the prefabs folder. And under interactable character, I have my rabbit unit spawn node. So I'll just drag that over here. And now the rabbit should spawn there, and I should be able to kill it and get a rabbit animal hide. Let's just go kill the rabbit without actually learning the skinning skill first. And you can see that he has no loot. This time, let's learn the skinning skill. I'll click on Learn, and then we will run over and aggro the rabbit again. And once we kill him, then because we have the skinning skill this time, and that prerequisite was set on the loot, then you can see that he now shows as lootable, and I collected 2 animal hides from him. That's good enough for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, don't forget to thumbs up the video or subscribe to the NERPG YouTube channel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.